Ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the Qatar Foundation Education City Speaker Series. My name is Marcello Contestabile. I'm Chief Scientist at the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute, and I'm also Adjunct Professor at the College of Public Policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. So the theme for today's talk is Solidarity, Sustainability and Science, Solutions for a Brighter Future. The session will consist of a 40-minute moderated discussion, followed by a 15-minute question and answer. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our special guest for the afternoon, His Excellency, Mr. Csaba Korosi.
Thank you much for having me.
Please. So, Mr. Csaba Korosi is a Hungarian diplomat currently serving as the president of the 77th General Assembly of the United Nations. He's a career diplomat, has spent his entire professional life in public service, combining national duties with assignment to the international community. Prior to his current role, Mr. Korosi has also served as co-chair of the United Nations Intergovernmental Process tasked with producing the UN 2030 Agenda, which has the Sustainable Development Goals at its heart. We are delighted that Mr. Korosi could be with us today, and please join me in welcoming him once more. So, Mr. Korosi, I would like to start this conversation by the reason why you're in Doha today, which is the UN conference on the least developed countries, LCD 5. And I would like to get your thoughts on your goals and aspirations coming into this important event.
First and foremost, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure being here at the Qatar Foundation. It's a great pleasure being associated to your institute. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is in crisis. And in the crisis, the most vulnerable countries suffer the most. We had many agreements supporting the least developed countries. We have action programs. We have commitments, and in crisis time, nevertheless, it seems that all previous or most of the previous results in lifting LDCs from their poverty, from their very complex situations, in crisis time, almost everything seems to roll back. It is a historic moment. We need to stop this rolling back. We need to give the chance to the most vulnerable in the world to catch up and to build a sustainable future. Because future will be sustainable, or there will be no future. And there will be only sustainable future if we can do it in all countries. I'm not naive, and I don't believe that all LDCs will be at the level of Qatar on the next year. Of course not. But we have to exercise a very solid degree of solidarity in the world. Not only because it's a moral obligation, not only because it is agreed upon, but we have to understand, in the long run, either we all make it, or we will all suffer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Korosi. I would just take a moment to make sure that your microphone is working properly.
Can you hear me now? Good.
Excellent.
For the technical mistake.
So, following up on that, how do you see the role of small states, such as Qatar, in helping this process along in such time of crisis?
In many ways, but let me start from something that is less obvious, because when people hear about Qatar, what is the first image they think about? Oh yes, a wealthy country, the very highly developed country, the country that is helping the half of the world. Yes, it is true, but let me start from somewhere else. If we are really looking for solutions for the big issues in the world that require multilateral approach, multilateral agreements, there are always champions, always countries who are more devoted, more knowledgeable, more skillful to lead the rest of the countries in the United Nations. Usually, many small countries play a much more visible and much more important role than their physical weight. If I cannot disclose this small secret, the world is now getting prepared for a very, very painful negotiation series to look into the SDGs, what has been achieved, what has not been achieved, how are we going to make the transformation. It will be one of the most important and most complicated negotiation processes in the General Assembly in the months to come. Who do you think the leader of the negotiations would be? It will be Qatar, with that lady in the first row in helm. And of course, many countries, including smaller countries who have the means and policies to help others, used to play a very, very important role, including Qatar and some other relatively small countries who thus elevate themselves into the international arena, international fora, into roles which is much, much more influential than the number of population or the size of the GDP.
This is really interesting insight, and it makes us all feel more empowered. So thank you very much for that. Talking about empowerment, in developing countries, the role of young people cannot be understated. 90% of young people defined between 10 and 25 years of age actually live in developing countries. How do you see the role of UN and possibly also Qatar Foundation in supporting their empowerment?
One of my favorite exercises in the UN, when I can sit down for a town hall with young people. The other one, when I can do the same with scientists or civil society organizations. Why? Because those big issues, what we started touching upon, climate change, crisis, water crisis, energy, food crisis, so altogether transformation. Whom will it affect mostly? Of course, all the living generations. But mostly we are talking about the chances of life and our societies in 1 or 2 generations after. So whatever we decide today will be the fate of the next generation tomorrow and after tomorrow. Whatever we fail to do today, the consequences will have to be paid by the next generation. Therefore, I keep encouraging all my young colleagues, young friends, be them teenagers or early 20s, be them high school age students or university age students. It's not enough if you are only asking for a place around the table. Do ask, but it's not enough. Bring your ideas, bring your demands, and place your notions in an integrated manner into the middle of the story. If we see what is your interest, if you see where things are going, it will be the best way how we can make a solution that will suit your interest and the interest of your children. My generation has greatly responsible for creating some of the crises. But we are together the first generation, if you wish, that has already understood the nature of the crisis, and we are the last generation, together with you, who has a chance to improve that. If we don't do it today, if you don't do it today, it will be a very, very difficult future.
This is a very powerful message and very inspiring for the students and young colleagues who are listening to us today. So thank you very much. You mentioned difficult conversations ahead and agreements that will have to be reached. By the way, we hear, it's recent news that just a few hours ago, a very important agreement was reached on high seas and protection of the environment. So congratulations to the United Nations on this. I would like to ask you particularly how you see your agenda, which, by the way, defines the title of this event today, which is Solidarity, Sustainability, and Science, as one that can help both reach this agreement and, most importantly, implement them.
Let us start from the crisis. We need to understand where we are in order to go for the solutions and the solidarity. We are in the middle of the most complex crisis humanity has ever seen, at least in the last 70 years. It's a combination of a more traditional geopolitical type of crisis and those types of crises that are stemming from the non-sustainable way of development. Individually, we have known these crises for many, many years. But it was the first time during the COVID when we got them all together. And therefore, I believe how they interact, these crises, and how they impact our societies, it marks a new chapter of history. You may have heard about the scientific expression of this age, which is the Anthropocene age. When humanity became the actor or factor number one influencing the conditions of life on this earth. This Anthropocene age started somewhere between the 50s and 70s of the last century. But I'm fully convinced that we are in a new chapter of that age that started with the COVID and it's unfolding as we speak. It's characterized by the nature of the crisis, the very rapid unfolding of the crisis, the very complex nature of the crisis, and all the consequences that we have to face. So, in order to face this very complex type of crisis, in the age of the geopolitical divide and deepening distrust among member states, what do you do? What do you do if you are a diplomat? What do you do if I run an international organization? You start creating common ground among member states, which is not easy when wars are going on, when countries going apart. So it will be very difficult on the ideological ground. It will be very difficult on the geopolitical ground. But since we know that many other types of crises are going to undermine our lives, climate crisis, water crisis, food crisis, energy crisis, biodiversity decline, the pollution of oceans, these are all belonging to the so-called global common goods. Those spheres on this earth, what serve us, all of us, and we all have an impact on these spheres. But let's ask ourselves, do we have a reliable governance system with all these services, all these spheres? Unfortunately not. Not with all of them. Most of them we don't have. So if we try to create a common ground, probably it is the area where we have a chance, because we have a common interest there. And we have a common interest to survive, and we have a common interest to prosper. Therefore, when dealing with these issues in the General Assembly in the United Nations and trying to reform the functioning of the United Nations, it's exactly where we try to seek how to go ahead. What do you do when you have a strong divide among member states? You start building your decisions on evidence, scientific evidence, because we may debate, or you may debate with your partners on how different wars started, how different wars could be evaluated. But when we measure something in the air, or in the water, or in the forest, or in the biodiversity, and that is hard evidence, you don't start debating it on ideological basis. 2 is 2, 3 is 3. So it is something common, the common language of science. Once we have this common ground, what we do, we try iron out solutions. Solutions that bring us the possibilities, solutions that in order to be implemented, we all have to take responsibilities. Some countries, some actors that have more responsibilities, more resources, more opportunities, probably will chip in more. Some others who are in more vulnerable situations will need the help of others. That's what we call solidarity. Because at the end of the day, on many of these crisis issues, if we think long term, for example, in climate, there's only one climate in this earth. Either this climate will be suitable for human civilization and we survive, or if not suitable for civilization, we all will suffer. Therefore, science, solidarity, and solutions come together.
Perfect. This is very clear. And you touched on climate change. Clearly, the United Nations have been active for a long time on the science as well as on the diplomacy of climate change. How do you see this evolving in terms of reconciling the perspective of different groups of nations? So the developed industrialized economy, the emerging economies, including the high-income fossil fuel exporter economies, as well as, obviously, the developing countries. All of them have different needs. Science can help, but what more can the UN do?
Absolutely. Let me first pay my tribute to those scientists who, in the framework of the IPCC, it is the Intergovernmental Program on Climate Change, many years ago started putting together the data and their analysis and informing politicians that, hey people, look at the data, we are going to a very dangerous direction. And it went on for years and years, and politicians basically did not really listen to that. Because the political logic is, when the next elections will be, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, okay, that will be my interest. You are talking about 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, 50 years. I will not even be alive in 50 years' time. That was the prevailing political attitude. And climate change started hitting. Climate change is hitting today, every day. So politicians and electors, people on the ground started feeling that it's not a science fiction. It's not about the future. It's about today. When you ask the Pakistanis what happened to their countries, within 2-3 days' time, 25% of the country came underwater. If you ask people in the Sahel, where about 6 million people are now on the road because of the drought, because of the depletion of the soil, they are losing their livelihood where they live. If we project it for 2050, tens of millions will be in a very similar situation in just one part of the world. So climate change is not only real, climate change is a crisis that is happening as we speak. Now, how we address it, and what is the logic of the Paris Agreement on climate, or all the consequent understandings and agreements built on the Paris Agreement. We jointly created a situation. We changed the climate of our Earth. Our roles in changing that climate were different. Some countries who got industrialized 200 years ago contributed to the climate change, much greater than some of those who have no industry, basically, or have even today very modest output of greenhouse gases. Some other countries who got industrialized later historically have less contribution to the climate change, but at a given moment today they are on the top, including Qatar, one of the highest per capita emission of greenhouse gases. So when we talk about a climate agreement, it's a very complex agreement on where we are, how are we going to solve it, and what are the obligations of different countries. In general, the more industrialized, traditional, I would say northern countries have the obligation to chip in more, to start cutting their greenhouse gas emissions earlier and faster, while giving a bit of more time for the developing countries to strengthen their economies, and then starting the mitigation efforts stronger. The most important, by 2060, 2070, on this earth, we have to achieve the so-called climate neutrality. So not to emit more greenhouse gases than the nature itself can absorb. The good news that we have that understanding. We even know what might be the desirable national programs to achieve that. We even have commitments from the side of many countries, from Qatar, from the United States, from the United Kingdom, and many others. The bad news that most of the countries don't act according to those plans. Therefore, today, instead of seeing a reduced emission, the emission is still rising. And mind you, whatever we have emitted in terms of carbon dioxide, CO2, it will stay in the air an average 50 to 250 years. It means what we emit today will have an impact on the global warming for at least 50 years more, but maybe 200 years as well, depending on the conditions. So the bad news that we are not honoring our commitments as much as we should. Now what happens if we go that way? Today we are at the trajectory of reaching 2.6, 2.8 Celsius by the end of this century. Our aim in Paris was to stop the climate change at 2 Celsius and then to go back. Later, we ratcheted up to the efforts to make sure that we are not going to cross 1.5 Celsius, because for some countries it would be a death sentence. Low-lying small island states. If we want to honor the 1.5 Celsius, or even 2 Celsius, the later we start the global reduction of the emissions, the steeper it will be. If we want to stay within 1.5 Celsius, which I'm afraid it's already gone, in a couple of years' time we are going to cross it. But if we would like to honor that commitment, from now, each and every year, we should reduce at least 6% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Do you know when was the only year when we reduced 6%? It was during the COVID lockdown, when basically the world economy was brought to standstill. And no one has the appetite to repeat that. But to change the technology so quickly that for the next year we could go for the minus 6% of increase, it is very, very slow. It has very slim chances. So the later we can go to the reduction, the steeper the reduction has to be, or we are going to cross the red lines. That is the most probable scenario now.
You mentioned COVID, and many people have pointed out that COVID, in a way, provided an accelerated, if you like, experiment of what climate change would be like, and the impact of lack of timely action from governments and lack of solidarity. So hopefully we will have learned some lessons from COVID and will be able to act in a more timely and showing more solidarity when it comes to climate change. I would like to now shift to a different subject, which is just as critical and has not received as much attention as climate change, which is the water crisis. And I know that you've been particularly active and it's very close to your heart. And this year, we're going to have a UN conference on water, particularly. And I understand that that conference could be a forgive this, the parallel watershed moment for water policy. Would you like to elaborate on how you see this particular conference being pivotal for?
The greatest pleasure. But if you allow me just one sentence about the COVID. There might be some follow-up questions from the audience later. In my understanding, the COVID crisis introduced to us the prototype of the Anthropocene era crisis. We are going to see it very soon, unless we can prevent. On the water conference, do you know when the last UN full-fledged water conference took place? Yes. 1977, almost 50 years ago. It was in Mar del Plata, Argentina. Since then, no one dared to organize a full-fledged UN water conference, despite the fact that we all see and we all know that we are marching into a very deep water crisis. For most people, the climate change, the climate crisis, is felt like a water crisis. Because 80% of the climate change is felt through water. When I say that climate crisis is felt like a water crisis, it's felt like drought, like floods, or polluted water. So if we are in the very, very deep dangerous situation concerning water, let me just mention some of the figures which may remind us where we are concerning the lack of water, the drought. By 2030, the difference between the availability of fresh water and the water demand will show 40% difference. There will be 40% more demand for water than the availability. By 2030, 40% of the grain what we are going to consume will have to come from the areas which are prone to very serious drought. Half of the hospital beds in developing countries are occupied by patients who are suffering from illnesses coming from water-related diseases. And one of the most devastating natural disasters what we can have now are the flash floods. So what we have to do in a relatively short period of time to change the tide, to change the whole story, to change the whole water management, how we treat our waters, how we manage our waters nationally, locally, and globally. We need to seek the Paris moment of the water action. That is going to happen, hopefully, what the world may feel on the 24th of March, when we finish this conference. By then, we will be identifying the real game changers, solutions for the problems, the types of cooperation we need, the scientific support, and the follow-up mechanism that will help us implementing and evaluating the implementation. That is what I hope will happen in 2-3 weeks' time in New York. Whoever has the possibility to join, either online or personally, please follow us, please join. I hope it will be a historic moment.
We hear your call for getting involved and contributing to addressing this major challenge loud and clear. I am conscious of time. We would like to have some time for questions and answers from the audience, but before we do that, I would like to ask you to kindly give your message to the diverse QF community, and particularly the numerous students. I understand more than 3,500 students we have currently at QF from very different backgrounds. What is your message to them? How can we best help support the UN agenda for water, climate change, and all the other challenges that we're facing?
My message number one first, let's acknowledge that it is not about issues out there. It is not something abstract environmental issues. These problems about us, about our future, about our civilization. So whatever we do or we fail to do, it will determine our future. My second message, it's about you. Because whatever we try to launch today, the implementation will be partly your job, and the results will be felt partly in your time. And the third, we have to make an agreement. If you wish, a social contract. What we are trying to do now is a transformation, a huge transformation, both globally and in all our societies. In order to have a good understanding what we are doing, have a good consensus that everybody is on board, we have to make some kind of social contract. Not necessarily in a written form, but it can be. We have to have a shared understanding. Please shape this social contract. Be part of it. So, be conscious, it's about you. Be conscious, it's for you. And be conscious, it's about with you.
Mr. Croce, this was a very powerful message. Thank you very much. I would like to open the floor for questions. We have roving microphones. Gentleman there with the gray jacket, and then second next.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Rami Al-Farra from Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute. Since the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992 until Sharm el-Sheikh last year in Egypt, within the United Nations framework, we had 27 editions of the COP conference. The 28th is around the corner and next door. Along this long journey, we had multiple important milestones. We had Kyoto, where countries started committing to emission targets. We had Paris, which you highlighted, where we wanted to limit climate change. It has taken a long time. The output, the result is still below what we should expect or get. Do you think it is time now for the UN to rethink the scope of the COP, how COP is delivered, what is COP achieving? In terms of solutions, as in the title of this discussion, we know that most of the emissions come from a handful of countries, from multinational companies that global. We know the science has solutions from carbon capture, from blue hydrogen, from all sorts of types of clean energy. COVID showed us that when the political will exists and the financial resources are available, science can deliver very quickly. We had a vaccine rolled out globally within a year. Do you think this is a time for us to really think how we deliver and tackle climate change? Thank you.
Absolutely. Couldn't be more timely. First and foremost, let's take the very urgent issue. Most of the COPs so far were about mitigation. How are we going to cut emissions? It still remains very, very important. But as I tried to hint earlier, it's too late. If we only focus on the mitigation, curbing the emissions, then we are not going to survive the forthcoming 15 years. Many of us will not survive. Therefore, one of the major changes, what we have to achieve now, to pay at least as much attention to the so-called adaptation. It means how are we going to survive the forthcoming years? How we will turn our societies, cities, villages, companies, agriculture, food production and infrastructure able and capable to survive the forthcoming 10, 15, 25 years until we will be feeling the impact of the reduced emissions. So that is already half of the revolution. The second, I think we have to listen better to the voice of science. Third, and that will be absolutely revolutionary, we are working with my colleagues on it in the United Nations. We have to rethink the economy of the crisis. We have to rethink the economy of the climate change. We have to rethink the economy of sustainability transformation. Because if we, in our economic thinking, counting only those factors and those results, what we like, we may have a very interesting outcome, but it may not be the reality. If we leave the externalities aside, we may have encouraging pictures, and at the same time, we'll go down to drain. Let me give you concrete examples. If all our activities, economic and social activities, do have impacts on environment, it means natural capital, on the economic capital, but having impact on social capital and human capital. If we only want to focus on what we really like, and we leave many of the impacts outside of the attention, we will create bubbles, which will be there, but we don't want to take them into consideration. For some times we believe that those bubbles will stay there, they will leave it behind. But we know they tend to burst. What is the climate change? Climate change is the accumulation of the side effects. Climate change is the accumulation of the externalities, negative externalities. What is global water crisis? Global water crisis is the sum of the negative externalities of our water management, what we did not want to pay attention. So it's high time if we do it right, of course, it will have financial consequences as well, because we have to plan our projects to keep in mind to make them water smart, climate smart, biodiversity smart, because that is the essence of our development. If we don't do that, we'll create even further bubbles. But if we do that, it will be a start of a new wave of economic thinking. We call in the SDG agenda going beyond GDP. We are not going to eliminate GDP. GDP is a very, very important and useful indicator. But GDP is measuring everything except what is worth for life. We need to measure everything that what we cause and what has an impact on our lives. Therefore, we need to create a new system of measurement of sustainable transformation, and we have to create a new logic of building our economies. Last but not least, if today you will be asked a very simple question, are we making progress on sustainability transformation? What is the honest answer? We don't know. We have educated guesses, but basically we don't know, because we have no tool for measuring. That is what we try to create now.
Thank you very much. And certainly the mention of looking at new economic measures and new economic models is one that resonates with us here at Qatar Foundation through the recent work of Earthna. We will be focusing on not only on the physical science, but also on the economic science of this particularly difficult problem. I would like to move to the next question, gentlemen, on the second row. Sorry, there was somebody. Very good. So, there at the back first. Sorry.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
My name is Omar Khodr, and I'm currently completing my Master's in International Public Policy in Queen Mary, London. So, on the topic of really answering the question, I mean, whether we are making any progress in sustainability. Earlier, you mentioned about evidence, the cruciality of evidence in concocting policy decisions. Sorry. Has the UN gotten into consideration about the marginalization of evidence and the relativity of evidence? And I'll give a quick example. So in 2010, Japan highlighted an issue they had with their TOEFL results as an indication to the level of English language in the country. So in 2010, it was around 135th ranking out of 165 countries. So what they did as action to mitigate, they went ahead and reformed their English programs, and they introduced a policy standard, or a CEFR English standard, to go ahead and improve. Now, over the years, 8 years later, according to the standard they've developed, their English language has been improving significantly over the years. However, despite this, in 2018, their TOEFL results ranked even worse than before. So there is a degree of relativity to evidence to consider, right? Politics of evidence, one may say. What has the UN done to mitigate in this two regards? Has this been a consideration?
I cannot comment on the Japanese example, though the weird situation of how mismeasurement can mislead us. Do you know when was in the last 10 plus years the highest GDP growth in Japan? The year of the Fukushima crisis. So if you just look at the data of GDP, because we wanted to measure GDP, it was the most successful year. The year of one of the largest nuclear catastrophe in the human history. That you are absolutely touching the substance of how to create the methodology of measuring sustainable development. Because obviously it is going to be a big data exercise. It is going to be measuring very various types of, indicators, various types of data. And we have to starting from human capital, social capital, natural capital, built capital, financial capital, how to bring them together and measuring the interchanges of these capitals and trying to identify the overall results, whether or not the overall balance is growing or shrinking. This methodology doesn't exist now. We have partial results, or partial pieces of that, which have been developed in different workshops, in different platforms, be it OECD, be it World Bank, European Union, or some countries who have seriously dealt with this question. But the overall methodology of measuring sustainable development, the transformation, is still to be developed. And there are huge debates of how to include some of the elements, how to make them applicable and flexible enough to be used in countries with various different conditions. Obviously, the challenges in Canada or UK will be different from those of Mali or Tonga. But if we create this system of measurements, it should be flexible enough, relatively easy to use, definitely informing enough. And there is one more trick we haven't discussed today yet. All our indicators, what we are using now, are informing us retrospective. What we have done in the last months, last year, last decade, and so on. Now we are looking for a methodology that could be used as a planning tool as well. So if we go for the integration of water and climate policies, if we go for this project or that project, what will be the overall impacts on the human capital, social capital, environmental capital, economic capital? So it's a revolution in economic thinking, but you're absolutely right, one should be very careful. In what conditions, what countries, what time, what to take as a very important factor, and what might be, in a given condition for the given country, a less important factor. If we have that methodology, I think it will be a different world.
We're going to need models for that, with all their strengths and weaknesses, but definitely this is the way forward. I would like to invite the gentleman in the second row to ask his question.
I think, hi, Your Excellency, my name is Habis Houel, I am from Qatar Foundation. I think during COVID taught the world how to act in a crisis. And we saw how the crisis, it became a catalyst for innovation and creativity. How could we utilize all the global crises to innovate, to allow the community, countries, to the entire world to innovate? Because during COVID, it's not just about the pandemic that came to solve the health issues. There is a technology that came to allow children to continue their education. There is tools that generated during COVID. How could we foster the creativity and innovation while we are facing this challenge from one side? From the second side, how could we make community and countries accountable? Because we cannot fix the challenge from one side, while the other side, someone is like increasing the size of the challenge. We saw in education above all, create a good example for the entire world, how one organization in collaboration with the entire world enrolled 10 million out of school children. But on the other side, we saw multiple countries starting increasing the crisis of refugees, increasing like the war, the conflict. It's continue from the other side. If we want to create a solution, the solution, while we are fostering the innovation and creativity, the people must be accountable, and the UN and the other international organization make those people accountable about their action, if it's positive or negative. Thank you.
I fully agree. Let me start with the first one. The crisis is providing an opportunity to learn. If you are optimist, let's say, if you are pessimist, you see a problem in every opportunity. If you are an optimist, you see an opportunity in every problem. Let's be an optimist on this field. Let's take the lessons learned from the COVID crisis. What were the factors that brought down one society after the other in terms of a couple of months? Why our economies went down? Why our supply chains got broken? Why the international distrust became very, very weak within a couple of weeks, couple of months? Why sovereign debts started skyrocketing during the COVID crisis? And how all this bunch of crises actually brought down complete societies? If we take the lessons learned, we have a better chance to weather the next crisis. Because, make no mistake, it will be repeated, this way or the other. Even if we take the very, very narrow possibility among the many, many others that when the next pandemic would come to us, the modeling, scientists modeling, telling us that the chance of seeing at least as bad pandemic as it was within 25 years is between 52 and 58%. To see this type of crisis being repeated within 10 years, the chance is about 25%. So it's way high. So let's get prepared, learn the lessons. If we do it, we can make it with much, much less consequences. On the issue of the accountability, I fully agree. In many, many ways. In the terms of what you have mentioned, let's be accountable for our emissions. Let's be accountable for our climate policies. But I would go further. Do we have in our international system the same logic as prevailing in the legal systems? When we talk about rights, we used to talk about responsibilities. In each and every country, since the legal system of Rome, these two have always been together. Now we tend to speak much more about our rights and tend to forget about our obligations and responsibilities. If we forget about our obligations, accountability, as you said, responsibilities, then obviously someone else will have to stand for us. Who they are? You are, your generation, and your children. Because make no mistake, someone will have to pay. Nothing comes free. So I'm very, very much for making accountability very strong, very visible in the UN on all levels, not only in terms of climate change. But for example, if countries have been elected to be member of the Security Council, it's a special responsibility. It's a special privilege that 193 countries have delegated country X to serve for 2 years, or like the P5, forever, to decide on heavyweight issues in the world. What do you expect from those countries? To deliver, to be the guardian of international peace and security. And if the Security Council doesn't deliver, what expression comes to your mind? Where is the accountability? Why have we sent you there? What are you doing? You, of course, may also say that, yes, we know who is the aggressor, who is the one who is casting veto, but at the end of the day, it is about accountability. And it's about accountability when we make an agreement on education, on healthcare, on water, It's not enough to produce a nice piece of paper. It's not enough to say that this percentage or that percentage will have to be met. We have to make it happen. But now let me open a very, very dangerous question. Please don't misunderstand me. This era where we are has also changed some of the conditions. We used to live, never mind what culture, we used to live in rules-based societies for hundreds of years, be it royal decrees, be it laws, written laws, unwritten laws, moral rules, religious rules, how we grew up for centuries. We knew what are the rules. Even if they change, we know that those rules are orienting us to a very large extent. Not that everybody is following the rules for 100%, but we know what are the rules. What have we started doing 20 years ago? We noticed that despite our rules, we are going to the wrong direction on a number of issues. So we started creating goals. SDGs, biodiversity goals, climate goals, goals on disaster risk reduction, in many other fields. Why have we created them? Because we wanted to change the course of events. And I think it was a solid and good idea. And we agreed on those goals. What happened afterwards? They were meant to change the world and to change our actions, but we have not necessarily changed our rules. And in some instances, some cases, our goals and our existing rules might contradict to each other. Not because countries are willing something bad. They are not driven by ill conceptions. Today, more than 3,000 court cases are going on against governments and companies because the actions and programs of the governments and companies do not necessarily match the ambition level enshrined in the goals where our countries and governments agreed upon. So what is the solution? Accountability is very important. Should we give up the goals? Then we all go down to drain. Should we change our rules? In some instances, yes, I think so. It takes time, it takes courage, and it takes the exercise of the accountability.
Fascinating discussion. I think we have one question at the back. This will be the last one because we already exceeded our time.
Hello, it's Lul from Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. I have a question about double counting, Article 6. Since its emission reduction raises concern among small island countries, why double counting was placed under the mitigation and came without corresponding adjustment?
Sorry, could you repeat your last sentence? I'm not sure I heard you correctly.
Why it was placed under mitigation and without corresponding adjustment, and how oil exporting countries will act toward it?
Oh, I'm afraid it's so technical and so detailed. You really need to take part in the negotiating room, because there are many similar issues where
I'd be delighted to.
You make deals. And it's not a precise answer for your questions. I just would like to relate to the broader perspective. On some details of these agreements, you place something into one place of the one part of the equation, and some other parts into the other part of the equation. The most important that at the end of the day there should be an agreement. everybody should somehow feel satisfied. The second, there should be an aggregated result that will show that we will be marching to the climate mitigation and healthier climate policies. So I'm not entirely sure how that night of the negotiations unfolded and why it is here and why not in the other paragraph. But if you have a good solution, please come forward.
I'm environmentalist, actually. I'm environmentalist, actually.
Okay.
So I will be delighted to be the part of negotiation and create also a solution for that.
Okay. The IPCC is about 3,000 students. 3,000 scientists. The UN negotiations are always including scientists, civil society activists, and people of the practice. So if you think that you have to say something in the future negotiations, be it on sustainable development, transformation, I think through your governments there is a direct channel how you can personally chip in into the processes.
I hate to have to bring this very interesting discussion to a close. I would like you all to join me in thanking His Excellency Mr. Koroshi for his very insightful thoughts, for taking the time to be with us today and for giving us so much food for thought, but also inspiration to get directly involved more in future. So, Mr. Koroshi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcello, and many, many thanks to all of you who sacrificed your afternoon, and many thanks for your attention, thoughts, and questions. Many thanks. It has been a great privilege to be with you today.
And two very quick messages from me. If you're interested in sustainability, EarthNA is hosting his summit on the 8th and 9th of March at Musharraf downtown in Doha. The theme is one of sustainability in hot and arid climates. So please look up the EarthNA summit and join us there. I would also invite you to look the QF website for the future sessions of the Education City speakers session. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for coming and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.